Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the guardian of Gotham in Batman's absence. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world dissolved into a symphony of screaming metal and fractured light. One moment, Izuku Midoriya, the hero Deku, was in the heart of Mizutofu, Japan, a familiar landscape of gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets. The next, he was caught in the epicenter of a nightmare. The villain called himself Voidwalker, a man with a quirk as grandiose and terrifying as his name. He didn't create simple portals. He tore holes in the fabric of reality itself. These rifts were not clean, shimmering ovals. They were jagged, violent wounds in the air, bleeding chaotic energy, pulling and pushing with unpredictable gravitational tides. Buildings warped in their proximity, asphalt buckled, and the very air crackled with a sound like tearing silk. Evacuate the West Block. Endeavor's voice, a roar of pure command, blasted through the comms. Flames erupted from his boots, a controlled inferno propelling him toward Voidwalker. Deku, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of green lightning and black energy. Float. He mentally commanded, rising above the chaos. One for all coursed through him at 35%, a manageable, humming power that felt like a second skin. His danger sense was a persistent, high-pitched thrum at the base of his skull, a constant alarm in a field of 1,000 threats. Analysis. Villain's quirk has a 5-second charge time before a new rift opens. The rifts are unstable, collapsing after approximately 15 seconds. The gravitational pull is strongest at the edges. Must prioritize civilian rescue. His movements are erratic, but he favors creating defensive rifts in front of him when pressured. Black Whip. Tendrils of dark energy shot from his arms, wrapping around a chunk of falling debris the size of a car. With a focused grunt, he flung it into an empty plaza, away from the screaming crowds. Below, he saw his classmate, Shoto Todoroki, erecting massive walls of ice, creating barriers to shield civilians and funnel them towards safety. It was a well-oiled machine, the synergy of a new generation of heroes. Voidwalker, a gaunt figure in a patchwork cloak, cackled as he dodged a jet of flame from Endeavor. You heroes are all the same. You build these perfect, orderly cities, but you forget, the natural state of the universe is chaos. He threw his hands forward, and a massive tear, 10 meters wide, ripped open the space between him and Endeavor. The world through the rift was a nauseating swirl of impossible colors and distorted shapes. Endeavor was forced to divert, his momentum lost. Deku saw his opening. Pushing one for all to 40%, he shot forward like a cannonball. Manchester Smash. He needed to end this now, before the collateral damage became catastrophic. But Voidwalker was ready. His eyes, wide with manic glee, locked onto Deku. A new plaything. Instead of a frontal rift, he created a tiny, shimmering tear directly behind Deku. Danger sense screamed, but it was too late to fully evade. The pull was immense, a physical, hungry thing. It latched onto his back, dragging him backward. He fired Black Whip, anchoring himself to the corner of a skyscraper, the cables of energy groaning under the strain. Don't you see, little hero? Voidwalker taunted, his form wavering as he poured more energy into the rift. There's always something bigger. Something darker. The pull intensified. Deku could feel the strange, non-Euclidean geometry of the space inside the rift trying to claim him. It didn't just pull at his body. It felt like it was pulling at his very atoms, trying to unspool him. Then, a child's scream cut through the din. A little girl, no older than 6, had tripped and fallen near the edge of the rift's influence. Her mother was desperately trying to reach her, but the strange gravity was holding her back. The girl was sliding, slowly but surely, toward the shimmering tear. There was no choice. There was never a choice. With a final, desperate surge of power, Deku snapped his Black Whip anchors, using the recoil to launch himself toward the girl. He scooped her up in an instant, the smell of burnt sugar from her dropped cotton candy filling his nose. Got you! He shouted, turning to throw her back toward her mother, but his proximity to the rift was now absolute. The moment he released the child, the full, ravenous power of the spatial anomaly seized him. His throw was true, The girl landed safely in her mother's arms. But Deku was lost. The world vanished. The sounds of Muzurifu were replaced by a deafening, absolute silence. He was tumbling through an abyss of screaming purple and sickly green, his body stretched and compressed simultaneously. He felt as if he were being turned inside out and right side in 1,000 times a second. There was no air, no up or down, only a violent, endless fall. He clamped his eyes shut, his mind, his very soul, reeling from the sensory violation. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. He didn't emerge. He was spat out. The impact was brutal. He slammed into a hard, wet surface with a force that knocked the wind from his lungs, his armor groaning in protest. The world came rushing back not as a gentle stream, but as a tidal wave of foul sensations. The first was the smell. It was a thick, oppressive miasma of wet garbage, decay, and a strange, metallic tang, all underpinned by the scent of old, rain-soaked concrete. It was nothing like the clean, rain-washed air of his home. This was a smell of neglect, of things left to rot in the dark. The second was the sound. A relentless, drumming rain fell from a sky he couldn't see, its drops echoing off metal fire escapes and collecting in greasy puddles. A distant siren wailed, but its pitch was different, deeper and more mournful than the ones he was used to. From the shadows came the unsettling scuttling of unseen things. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. A groan escaped his lips. His head swam, a nauseous vertigo left over from his traumatic journey. He was in an alley, a narrow, suffocating chasm between two towering brick buildings that seemed to lean in on him, their windows dark and vacant like the eyes of a skull. The walls were slick with grime and covered in graffiti that was more desperate scrawl than art. Steam rose from a manhole cover, mingling with the rain and carrying the scent of the city's bowels. Okay. Midoriya, analyze, he mumbled to himself, his voice hoarse. His training kicked in, a lifeline in the sea of confusion. Status report. He ran a mental check. No broken bones, just deep, throbbing bruises. His suit, his beloved Gamma, was scuffed and dirty but functionally intact. The iron soles of his boots were caked in a foul-smelling sludge. Comms, he whispered, tapping the side of his cowl. Todoroki? Endeavor-san? Can anyone hear me? Only static answered, a harsh, unforgiving hiss. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up his throat. He was alone. Utterly and completely alone. Where was this? Some hidden part of the city? Had Voidwalker's quirk transported him across the country? Across the globe? He took a deep, shaky breath, the foul air making him want to gag. Don't panic. First, assess the situation. Find a landmark. Get my bearings. He stumbled out of the alley onto a dimly lit street. The architecture was alien. It was all dark brick and stone, with ornate, Gothic flourishes that looked more like gargoyles and leering faces than simple decorations. The buildings were ancient, massive, and oppressive, casting long, deep shadows that the flickering neon signs from a bar across the street couldn't fully penetrate. The sign itself read Paul's Diner, the letters sputtering in the rain. The language was English, which was a relief, but the entire atmosphere felt foreign, heavy with a weariness he had never experienced before. It was then he heard it. A woman's panicked cry, followed by a man's guttural threat. Just give me the wallet, old man, and we can all go home. Deku's head snapped toward the source of the sound, another nearby alley. His exhaustion, his confusion, his fear, it all evaporated, replaced by the instinct that was now the core of his being. Someone was in trouble. He moved without a second thought, his footsteps silent on the wet pavement. Peeking around the corner, he saw a scene that was depressingly familiar to any hero. A family, a father, a mother, and a small boy huddled behind them, was cornered by two men. The assailants were gaunt and grimy, their clothes ragged. One held a shard of a broken bottle, its edge jagged and menacing. The other brandished a rusty tire iron. The father stood protectively in front of his wife and son, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Please, just take it. Don't hurt us. Shut up. The man with the tire iron snarled, his eyes crazed and desperate. The watch, too. And your wife's necklace. The little boy began to cry, a thin, terrified whimper that cut through Deku like a knife. That was enough. He stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light of the alley. His costume, a vibrant hero's green with its stark white and red accents, seemed to glow in the oppressive darkness. It was a beacon of color in a monochrome world. He cleared his throat, and the four figures in the alley froze, turning to look at him. He offered the most reassuring smile he could muster, the one All Might had taught him, the one that was supposed to calm all fears. "It's all right now," he declared, his voice ringing with earnest confidence. "Why?" "Because I am here." A Muzurifu, that line, or some variation of it, would have been met with cheers, with sighs of relief. It was a promise, a contract between hero and citizen. Here, in this dark, wet alley, it was met with dead silence. The two muggers stared at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The family looked just as stunned, their fear of the muggers now competing with a new, uncertain apprehension. "The hell is this?" the bottle wielder finally stammered. "Some kind of circus freak? Look at that stupid costume," the other one sneered, though a tremor of uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Get lost, kid, before you get hurt." Deku's smile didn't waver. "I would advise you to drop your weapons and wait for the police. It's the best option for everyone." The first mugger let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You hear that, Mickey? The bunny man is giving us advice." He took a menacing step forward. "I'm gonna carve that stupid grin off your face." He lunged. Deku didn't move from his spot. He simply raised his right hand, index and middle fingers extended. He had already calculated the trajectory, the man's weight, the force needed. He didn't need a smash. He didn't even need 1%. All he needed was a breath. Flick. He flicked his middle finger. A compressed pocket of air, no bigger than a fist, shot out with a sound like a muffled firecracker. It was precise, controlled, and utterly non-lethal. The invisible projectile struck the mugger's wrist. There was a sharp crack, and the broken bottle flew from his suddenly limp hand, shattering against the brick wall. The man cried out, clutching his arm, his face a mask of shock and agony. His companion, Mickey, stared in horror, his brain unable to process what had just happened. Before he could even react, a tendril of inky black energy erupted from Deku's back. Black Whip shot forward, impossibly fast, and wrapped itself around the tire iron, yanking it from his grasp. A second tendril followed, snaking around the man's torso and pinning his arms to his sides, lifting him a few inches off the ground. A third and fourth whip did the same to the first mugger, binding him securely. It was over in less than 3 seconds. Deku let his smile soften into one of gentle reassurance as he turned to the family. "Are you three all right? Are you injured?" He took a step toward them, his hand outstretched. The reaction he expected was relief. Tears of gratitude, perhaps. A hug from the little boy. The reaction he got was pure, undiluted terror. The mother screamed, a short, sharp sound of fright. The father instinctively yanked his wife and son back, pushing them further against the grimy wall, creating a human shield with his own body. He wasn't looking at Deku as a savior. He was looking at him as the new, and infinitely greater threat. "Stay back," the man stammered, his voice trembling. What are you?" Deku froze, his hand still outstretched, his smile faltering. I'm a hero. I'm here to help." "That wasn't normal," the man said, his eyes wide with fear, flicking from the impossibly strong black tentacles to the bound criminals. "You broke his arm with nothing. What kind of freak are you?" The word freak struck Deku with a physical force. He had been called that before, back when he was quirkless. But he had never, ever been called that after saving someone. The little boy, who had stopped crying, was now staring at Deku's bright costume and strange, rabbit-like cowl with wide, fearful eyes, as if looking at a monster from a nightmare. "Please," Deku said, his voice now laced with confusion and hurt. "I'm not going to harm you. I promise." His sincerity, his bright colors, his impossible power, it was a combination that this city, this family, was not equipped to understand. In their world, power like that belonged to monsters, to villains who tore the city apart. This brightly colored being who appeared from nowhere and subdued men with invisible force and living shadows was not a comfort. It was a terrifying anomaly. The father didn't reply. He just grabbed his family's hands and, without another word, scrambled out of the alley, slipping on the wet pavement in his haste to get away. They fled into the rain-swept street, not even glancing back. Deku was left standing in the alley, his arms still half extended. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the pained groans of the two webbed-up criminals. A profound sense of dislocation washed over him. He had done everything right. He had neutralized the threat efficiently, non-lethally, and saved the civilians from harm. It was a textbook heroic intervention, and they had run from him. They had looked at him with the same fear they had shown their attackers. His shoulders slumped. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a cold, heavy ache in his chest. He lowered his arm, the cheerful hero mask crumbling from his face. What was this place? Why were people so afraid? He left the muggers tied up for the police, assuming the police here would even know what to do with them, and walked numbly back onto the street. The city felt even more menacing now. The shadows seemed deeper, the rain colder. He felt a desperate need for information, for any clue that could explain this bizarre, hostile reality. His eyes caught a newspaper vending machine on the corner, its plastic window cloudy with moisture. Most of the papers inside were soaked, but one on top was partially legible. He fished a few waterlogged yen coins from a pouch on his belt, realizing with a jolt that they probably wouldn't work here. But the machine was broken, its coin slot jammed. With a gentle tug, he opened the dispenser. He pulled out the damp newspaper. The masked had read the Gotham Gazette. Gotham? The name meant nothing to him, but the headline, printed in thick black, apocalyptic letters, made his blood run cold. 6 months without the bat, fear grips city as crime soars. Below the headline was a grainy, black and white photo of a man in a dark, stylized bat suit, perched on a gargoyle, looking down at the city like a silent protector. The article was a grim litany of statistics and anecdotes. A 200% rise in violent crime. Gangs like the Penguins and Black Masks carving up the city with impunity. A general sense of despair that had settled over the populace since their protector, the Batman, had vanished following a cataclysmic battle with a homicidal madman known only as the Joker. Deku read the words again and again. Batman. Joker. Gotham. These weren't places or people he knew. There was no mention of quirks, only of costumed criminals and a lone vigilante. The pieces began to click into place in his analytical mind, forming a picture that was both terrifying and unbelievable. The different architecture. The different language being primary. The fear in the family's eyes. They weren't afraid of heroes. They were afraid of the unknown, of overwhelming power in a world where it was seemingly rare and almost always malevolent. And their sole protector, a man who apparently operated from the shadows and used fear as a weapon, was gone. This wasn't just a different city. This wasn't even his own planet. Voidwalker's quirk hadn't just teleported him. It had thrown him across dimensions. The newspaper slipped from his numb fingers, landing with a wet slap in a puddle. The full weight of his situation crashed down on him. He was stranded, lost in a world that was darker, colder, and more broken than his own. A world without heroes, his friends. Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Kaken, his mind raced through their faces. All Might. His mother. A wave of agonizing loneliness washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. They were gone. An entire universe away. He might never see them again. His dream, his promise to become the #1 hero and the next symbol of peace. What did that mean in a world that had never heard of All Might? For a moment, he let the despair take hold. He was just a boy, a teenager, a long, long way from home. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and a cold shiver ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. But then, he looked up. He saw the dark, oppressive buildings, heard the mournful sirens, felt the palpable fear that clung to the very air of this city. He remembered the terrified eyes of the family he had saved. They were afraid, and they were alone. Their symbol of hope, this Batman, was gone. His own fear and loneliness were still there, a heavy stone in his gut. But something else rose to meet it, the unshakable, indomitable spirit that had been forged in a crucible of childhood bullying and honed through countless life-or-death battles. It was the spirit of a true hero. I may be lost, he thought, his fists clenching at his sides. I may be alone, but I am still a hero. And these people, this city, they need one. A new resolve hardened in his eyes. He wouldn't crumble. He would adapt. He would learn. And he would protect this place until he found a way home. He had to. It was who he was. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and began to walk, a solitary beacon of impossible green against the endless, unforgiving night of Gotham City. He needed a high vantage point, a place to observe, to understand the battlefield this city represented. He didn't notice the figure watching him from the shadows of a rooftop high above. From his perch atop a grotesque stone gargoyle, Nightwing watched the entire scene unfold. He had been tracking the anomalous energy signature Barbara had detected, a massive, instantaneous burst that had appeared out of thin air in the heart of Crime Alley. His first thought was a dimensional breach, maybe something from Star Labs gone wrong. His second, more paranoid thought was a new weapon from one of Gotham's many lunatics. What he found was this: a boy in a costume so bright it was almost painful to look at. He watched the ridiculous, theatrical entrance, the bizarre proclamation. He watched the mugging end in the blink of an eye, with a display of power that made his blood run cold. One moment, the thugs were armed and dangerous. The next, they were disarmed and incapacitated by forces he couldn't even see. Telekinesis? Air manipulation? And those black things that erupted from the boy's body. They moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying. He was strong. Frighteningly strong. Strong enough to level the entire block if he lost his temper. And yet, his control was absolute. The force he used was just enough, no more. He was non-lethal, efficient, a professional, but his demeanor was all wrong for Gotham. The smile, the earnestness, the way he tried to comfort the family. He was a daylight hero, a creature of hope and optimism, dropped into the deepest part of the abyss. Nightwing wasn't surprised when the family fled from him. He understood their fear perfectly. In Gotham, anything that powerful and that new was a threat until proven otherwise. He watched the boy, he couldn't be older than 18, find the newspaper. He saw the slow, dawning horror on his face, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. He saw the flicker of despair, and then he saw it being stamped out, replaced by a steely determination that was all too familiar. It was the same look he saw in Bruce's eyes every single night, the look of a man accepting an impossible burden. The boy began to move, his purpose clear. Nightwing remained motionless, a phantom in the rain. Every instinct screamed at him. This newcomer, this metahuman, was the most powerful variable to enter Gotham's meat grinder in years. He was an unknown quantity of immense power, and he had to be dealt with. The city was a powder keg, and this boy was a lit match, but he had also seen the kid's face when the family ran. The genuine confusion. The hurt. He hadn't just saved them out of duty, he had wanted to help them, to reassure them. There was no malice in him, only a naive, powerful, and profoundly misplaced heroism. Rain dripped from the tips of his eskrima sticks. He keyed his calm oracle. "You seeing this?" "I see him," Barbara Gordon's voice replied, crisp and clear in his ear. "Energy readings are off the charts, Dick. I've never seen anything like it. It's not magic, not speed force, not anything in our database. He's an absolute unknown. He's a kid, Babs," Nightwing murmured, his eyes never leaving the green figure now making its way toward a fire escape. A lost kid with the power to flatten this city. He watched as the boy leaped, clearing 3 stories with impossible ease, and began to ascend the side of the building. "I'm going to make contact. Be careful, Dick," Oracle warned. He took down those thugs without breaking a sweat. "We don't know what he's capable of." "I know," Nightwing replied, his grip tightening on his sticks. "That's what worries me." He rose from his crouch, the rain slicking his dark uniform. He was the city's guardian now, the inheritor of a promise he struggled to keep every single night, and it was his job to confront the storm that had just landed in his backyard. As he began to ghost across the rooftops, silent and unseen, a single question echoed in his mind. Who are you? And are you Gotham's new savior, or its final nightmare? The rooftop was a sanctuary of cold stone and isolation. From this vantage point, high above the grimy streets, Izuku Midoriya could finally breathe, could finally think. The rain had softened to a persistent, misty drizzle that clung to his costume and beaded on the grotesque features of the gargoyle he stood beside. Its stone face, a permanent snarl of silent fury, seemed to embody the very soul of this city, Gotham. The name felt alien on his tongue. He looked out over the sprawling urban decay, a tapestry of shimmering neon and impenetrable shadow. Lights from thousands of windows dotted the landscape like distant, lonely stars, each one a story, a life, a potential victim in a city that had lost its guardian. The scale of it was overwhelming. Muzutafo was a modern marvel of gleaming steel and glass, a city built for a future of heroes. This place felt ancient, wounded, a labyrinth of brick and asphalt haunted by the ghosts of its own past. Analysis, he commanded himself, his mind defaulting to the familiar comfort of tactical assessment. The city layout is dense, with countless alleys and narrow streets providing cover. Rooftops are cluttered with old water towers, vents, and architectural flourishes, ideal for stealth and ambush. Visibility is low due to the rain and what looks like a permanent smog. A hero relying on high visibility and direct engagement would be at a severe disadvantage here. He was beginning to understand why this Batman was a creature of the night. You couldn't save a city like this with a bright smile and a flashy entrance. You had to become a part of its shadows. You had to fight it on its own terms. A faint scuff of a boot on wet gravel behind him was the only warning he got. Danger sense didn't scream. It flared, a sharp, cold spike at the base of his skull. He spun around, dropping into a low defensive stance, green lightning already crackling around him as he activated One for All at 5%. The figure stood 20 feet away, a silhouette against the city's jaundiced glow. He was lean and athletic, clad in a form-fitting suit of black armor highlighted with a striking blue emblem, a stylized bird of prey spreading its wings across his chest. In his hands he held two short, thick batons. His face was covered by a black domino mask, but even from this distance, Deku could feel the intensity of the man's gaze. It was a cold, hard stare, devoid of warmth or welcome. It was the look of a hunter who had just cornered his prey. Deku's first instinct, ingrained by years of hero society, was to see the costume and assume ally. This man was clearly a vigilante, like Batman. Perhaps a partner. Hello? Deku called out, straightening up slightly to appear less threatening, though the green energy still danced around his limbs. I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to get my bearings. Are you a hero here? The figure didn't answer. He just shifted his weight, his movements fluid and economical, a predator getting ready to pounce. You're trespassing, the man finally said. His voice was young, but edged with a weariness that spoke of long, hard nights. It was sharp, clear, and carried an unmistakable note of command. You're unregistered, unsanctioned, and you just used an unknown meta ability in the middle of Crime Alley. In this city, that makes you a threat. So, you're going to answer my questions. Who are you, and what do you want in Gotham? Deku's hope of a friendly welcome curdled in his stomach. This wasn't a greeting, it was an interrogation. My name is Deku, he replied, keeping his tone even. And I don't want anything. I'm lost. I ended up here by accident. Accidents like you don't happen in Gotham, the man countered, taking a slow step forward. They're usually prelude to something much worse. I'll ask you one more time. Who sent you? No one sent me. I was fighting a villain and he didn't get to finish. The man moved, a blur of motion that was shocking in its speed. He closed the 20-foot distance in a heartbeat. He wasn't as fast as a full call user, not even close, but for someone who Deku assumed was quirkless, his speed was breathtaking. Deku barely had time to raise his arms, his armored gauntlets taking the brunt of a vicious double baton strike that would have shattered an ordinary man's bones. The impact sent a jarring shock up his arms. The sheer force behind the blow was impressive. This was no amateur. Deku hopped back, creating distance. Please, listen to me. I'm not your enemy. The man, Nightwing, didn't seem to hear him. He flowed into his next attack, a dizzying display of acrobatics. A cartwheel flowed into a spinning kick aimed at Deku's head. Deku ducked under it, the wind from the blow whistling past his cowl. Nightwing used his momentum to land silently, and launch into a rapid-fire series of strikes with his eskrima sticks, targeting joints and pressure points with surgical precision. Deku was forced into a purely defensive dance. He weaved and dodged, parrying the strikes, his mind racing. He's fast. Incredibly skilled. His fighting style is a mix of several martial arts. I recognize some eskrima, savate, and aikido. He's anticipating my movements, trying to herd me toward the edge of the roof. He fights with the intelligence and efficiency of a pro hero like Eraserhead. The contrast was maddening. This man fought like a hero, moved like a hero, but his eyes held the cold suspicion of a jailer. Every time Deku tried to speak, to de-escalate, he was met with another swift, brutal attack. Frustration began to bubble inside him. He could end this in a thousandth of a second. A flick of his finger, a 1% smash, that's all it would take. But he couldn't. This man wasn't a villain. He was protecting his city, misguided as his aggression might be. Hurting him was not an option. Stop attacking me! Deku grunted, blocking a downward strike that cracked the concrete beneath his feet. I'm telling you the truth. In Gotham, the truth is just a lie you haven't seen through yet. Nightwing shot back, pressing his advantage. He threw something. 3 small, metallic objects shaped like his chest emblem hurtled through the air. Deku's danger sense flared. He sidestepped, and the wingdings embedded themselves in the stone wall behind him with a series of sharp thunks. They were sharpened, lethal. That was the last straw. This misunderstanding was becoming dangerous. As Nightwing closed in again, aiming a low sweep at his legs, Deku made a decision. He channeled a mere 8% of One for All into his legs and leaped straight up. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. He didn't just jump, he exploded upwards, ascending 50 feet into the air as if gravity were a minor inconvenience. He hung there for a moment, suspended in the rain-swept sky, looking down at the stunned vigilante. Nightwing froze mid-lunge, his head snapping up, his masked expression for once betraying his shock. He had seen metahumans, aliens, and gods, but the sheer, casual power of that leap, the quiet eruption of force, was on another level. From his vantage point, Deku called down, his voice amplified slightly by his mask. See? I could have hurt you at any point in that fight, but I didn't. I don't want to fight you. Can we please just talk? For a moment, there was silence. Nightwing stood perfectly still, recalibrating. The dynamic of the encounter had fundamentally shifted. He wasn't the hunter anymore. At best, he was a dog barking at a dragon, but Dick Grayson had not been trained by Batman to back down. He had been trained to adapt, to overcome. His mind raced, discarding strategies for direct combat, and moving toward containment and tactical warfare. He reached for his utility belt. Don't move, Nightwing ordered, his voice now even colder, tighter. He pulled out a grappling gun, but he didn't aim it at a ledge to escape. He aimed it at Deku. Deku, still hovering with float, watched in confusion. Before he could ask what he was doing, Nightwing fired. A high-tensile cable shot out, but instead of a grappling hook, the end split apart into a bola that wrapped around Deku's legs with incredible speed. Simultaneously, a powerful electrical current surged through the wire. Taser line. 10,000 volts, Nightwing stated, as if reading from a manual. Give up. Deku felt the electricity arc across his suit. It was a painful, jarring shock, enough to make his muscles seize. In his own world, it would have been a fight ender against a lesser hero, but his body, conditioned by the volatile, world-breaking power of One for All, was far more durable. The electricity was agonizing, but it wasn't debilitating. What it did, however, was disrupt his concentration. His control over float wavered. He began to fall. As he fell, he fired a tendril of Black Whip, which wrapped around the taser line and sent a feedback pulse of his own kinetic energy back toward the source. Nightwing yelped in surprise, the grappling gun flying from his hand as it sparked and short-circuited. Deku landed on the roof in a crouch, ripping the sparking bola from his legs. He stood up, the green lightning around him now flaring brighter with frustration. I said I don't want to fight, and I said I don't believe you. Nightwing yelled back, pulling his second eskrima stick and connecting them to form a short staff. You're too powerful to be left wandering around my city. He charged again. This time, Deku met him head-on. When Nightwing swung his staff, Deku didn't just block. He caught it. His gloved hand clamped around the center of the staff, halting its momentum completely. Nightwing's eyes widened behind his mask. He tried to yank it free, but it was like trying to pull a stick from a block of granite. The kid's grip was absolute. My city, Deku repeated, his voice low. You're trying to protect it. I understand that. I'm trying to do the same thing. By showing up out of nowhere and leveling half a city block? Nightwing snarled, struggling in his grasp. That wasn't me. That was the villain I was fighting. The one who sent me here. Lies. Nightwing grunted, letting go of the staff with one hand and jabbing at Deku's face with a taser built into the knuckles of his glove. Deku, still holding the staff, simply leaned his head back, dodging the blow. He was tired of this. He needed to make a point, but without causing real harm. He looked down at the staff in his hand and focused. He tightened his grip. There was a loud groan of protesting metal, then a series of sharp cracks. The electroplated, hardened steel staff, designed to withstand blows from super-strong brutes like Killer Croc, began to deform in his hand. It bent, twisted, and then, with a final, explosive snap, it shattered into two useless pieces. Nightwing stumbled back, staring at the ruined remains of his weapon, then at Deku's hand, then back at his face. All the fight, all the aggression, seemed to drain out of him in that one moment, replaced by a cold, stark realization of his own mortality. He was utterly, hopelessly outmatched. The two of them stood there, panting in the rain, the standoff thick with unspoken tension. Deku dropped the broken pieces of the staff. They clattered on the wet concrete, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. It was a voice in Nightwing's ear that finally broke the stalemate. Nightwing, said a calm, female voice, cutting through his internal comms unit. Stand down. Dick Grayson didn't relax his stance, but his focus shifted. Oracle? What is it? I've been analyzing the energy readings from his arrival and cross-referencing them with his power output during your spar. The signature is consistent with a theoretical wormhole event. It's unstable, exotic, and contains particles I can't identify. Whatever he is, he's not from around here. He might actually be telling the truth. Deku, of course, couldn't hear this. He just saw the vigilante's posture change, his head tilting slightly as if listening to someone. Furthermore, Oracle's voice continued, a hint of urgency in her tone. I've been monitoring his biometrics through thermal imaging. His heart rate is elevated, but not from aggression. His adrenaline levels are consistent with a defensive posture. He's stressed, not hostile. Every time you escalated, he chose to evade or neutralize the threat to himself, not you. He's been holding back this entire time, Dick. Substantially. Nightwing let out a slow, shaky breath. He knew she was right. He had felt it. The casual strength, the restrained speed. It was like fighting a tidal wave that was actively trying not to drown him. All right, he finally said, his voice low, speaking to the kid in front of him. He raised his hands in a universal gesture of truce. Okay. No more fighting. Deku watched him warily, the green lightning around him subsiding but not vanishing completely. You mean it? I mean it, Nightwing confirmed, his shoulders slumping just a fraction, the weight of his responsibility settling back onto them. My associate has corroborated parts of your story, or at least confirmed that it's plausible. He gestured vaguely at his ear. Now, let's try this again. From the beginning. Slowly. And you can start by telling me what a quirk is. The journey across the city was a surreal experience for Deku. Nightwing, after introducing himself by his codename, led the way, firing his grappling gun and swinging through the concrete canyons with a grace that was both beautiful and utterly alien. Deku followed, using a combination of float and low-percentage leaps, the feeling of soaring through this dark, gothic cityscape sending a strange thrill through him despite the direness of his situation. Nightwing led him not to a cave or a grand headquarters, but to a nondescript, abandoned-looking warehouse in the industrial district. The door, however, hissed open with a pneumatic hiss that betrayed high-tech security, revealing a clean, well-lit freight elevator. Where are we going? Deku asked, his voice echoing in the metal box as they descended. A safe place, Nightwing replied curtly. The tension between them was still thick enough to taste. It wasn't trust that had been established on that rooftop, merely a ceasefire born of pragmatism. The elevator opened into a spacious, subterranean bunker. It was stark and utilitarian, a far cry from the colorful, high-tech command centers Deku had seen in hero agencies back home. This place was all brushed steel, exposed wiring neatly tucked into conduits, and the hum of powerful computer servers. One entire wall was a massive bank of monitors, currently displaying dozens of camera feeds, weather patterns, and streams of cascading code. In the center of the room, a young woman with vibrant red hair sat in a highly advanced wheelchair, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. She turned as they entered, and her blue eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately locked onto Deku, scanning him with an analytical intensity that reminded him of Principal Nizu. "So this is our interdimensional tourist," she said, her voice the same calm, authoritative one from Nightwing's calm I'm Oracle. "And you are a walking scientific impossibility." Midoriya Izuku, he said, bowing slightly out of habit, feeling suddenly awkward and out of place. "My hero name is Deku." "Have a seat," Deku, Oracle said, gesturing with her head toward a simple metal chair. "You've had a long night. We have a lot to talk about." What followed was the strangest, most intense debriefing of Izuku's life. Guided by Oracle's sharp, incisive questions and Nightwing's silent, watchful presence, he explained everything. He spoke of a world where over 80% of the population was born with a superpower, a quirk. He described his school, UA High, a place dedicated to training the next generation of professional heroes. He explained the battle with Voidwalker, the terrifying sensation of being pulled through the dimensional rift. He was careful with the details of One for All. He described it as a unique, stockpiling quirk that was passed from one person to the next, a legacy power. He didn't mention All Might by name, or the generations of vestiges living within him. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even in a different reality. Oracle listened, her fingers never stopping their dance across the keyboard, pulling up articles on theoretical physics, cross-referencing his terminology with Earth's scientific lexicon. Nightwing leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable behind his mask. "So in your world," Oracle summarized after nearly an hour, "people with powers are the norm. They're registered, trained, and regulated. Being a hero is a government-sanctioned profession." "Yes, exactly," Deku said, relieved that she was understanding. "It's a pillar of our society." Here, Nightwing spoke up, his voice gravelly. "Power is an anomaly. It's feared. The few people who have it, they're either gods or monsters. Usually monsters." The weight of that statement settled in the room. Deku thought back to the family in the alley, their terrified faces. It made sense now. In their world, his appearance wasn't a promise of safety. It was the arrival of a new, unpredictable horror. He was a monster until proven otherwise. "And Batman?" Deku asked quietly. "The newspaper said he was your protector." A symbol. Nightwing's posture stiffened. A flicker of raw, unprocessed grief crossed his face before being suppressed. "He was," he said, his voice tight. "He's gone. Missing for 6 months. We think he's dead." The finality in his tone sent a chill down Deku's spine. He understood now. The weariness, the aggression, the heavy burden in Nightwing's eyes. It wasn't just suspicion, it was grief. It was the crushing weight of trying to hold the city together in the absence of its champion, his mentor, maybe even his father. "I'm sorry," Deku said softly, and he meant it. He knew the pain of a world without its symbol of peace. He had lived through All Might's retirement. This felt different. This was a raw, open wound. "We don't need your pity," Nightwing said, the defensive wall slamming back into place. "We need to figure out what to do with you." "The portal you came through dissipated the moment you arrived," Oracle added, her tone softening slightly. "There's no residual energy, no seam in reality to examine. As of right now, Izuku Midoriya, you're stranded here. We have no way to send you back." The words, though expected, hit Deku with the force of a physical blow. Stranded. The word echoed in the sterile silence of the bunker. A wave of homesickness and despair, more powerful than any he had felt so far, washed over him. His mother's face flashed in his mind, followed by All Might's reassuring smile, Uraraka's cheerful wave, Ida's chopping hand gestures, Kaken's explosive scowl. They were a universe away. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wouldn't cry. He couldn't. He was a hero. He had to be strong. He looked up, his emerald eyes meeting Nightwing's gaze, then Oracle's. His own pain was a fire in his chest, but he pushed it down, focusing on the problem in front of him. The hero's mindset. Then let me help, he said, his voice quiet but firm, imbued with a resolve that surprised even himself. I can't just sit here and do nothing while this city falls apart. I was trained to save people. It's all I know how to do. You're short a hero. Let me be one. Nightwing stared at him, a complex storm of emotion swirling behind his mask. He saw the kid's sincerity, the fierce, burning light in his eyes. It was a light he hadn't seen in Gotham for a long, long time. It was a dangerous light. A light that attracted monsters. A light that could get snuffed out in the blink of an eye. But it was also a light of hope. You have no idea what you're asking, Nightwing said, his voice a low warning. This city, it doesn't just need saving. It needs to be held back, contained. It will chew you up and spit you out. It will take your hope and crush it into dust. I've faced villains who could destroy cities, Deku replied, his voice unwavering. I've fought against despair. I won't break. A fragile, unspoken truce hung in the air. Not one of friendship, but of mutual desperation. Nightwing and Oracle had a city to save and were desperately outmatched. Deku was a hero without a world, driven by an unstoppable need to help. For now, their paths were aligned. Fine, Nightwing said at last, pushing himself off the wall. The decision had been made. You want to help? Then you do it our way. No more bright green costumes that make you a target for every psycho with a gun. No more grand entrances. You learn to move in the shadows. You learn to be a ghost. You learn the Gotham way. He turned to Oracle. Babs, is the prototype suit in the sublevel armory still viable? Oracle smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed her face. Wayne Tech is always viable. I'll get the specs ready. Nightwing turned back to Deku, his expression grim. Welcome to Gotham, kid. Try not to get killed. Deku nodded, a fire igniting in his chest. It wasn't the path he had chosen, but it was a path forward. He was lost, alone, and trapped in a world of darkness. But he had a mission. He had found allies, perhaps. He would learn their ways. He would become what this city needed. But as he looked around the cold, sterile safe house, a fortress of steel and shadows, he had never felt more alone. The safe house was a pocket of sterile order carved out of Gotham's chaos, but it offered Izuku Midoriya little comfort. Sleep had been a fleeting, shallow thing, snatched in a Spartan cot in a side room, his dreams a chaotic whirlwind of Voidwalker's portal and the terrified faces of the family he tried to save. He woke to the persistent, low hum of the servers and the feeling of being a specimen under a microscope. Nightwing, Dick, Oracle had called him, was gone, likely resting after a long night, but Oracle herself was already there, a sentinel in her chair, her face illuminated by the glow of a dozen holographic screens. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, a surprisingly human smell in this den of technology. She had offered him a mug, which he'd accepted with a grateful, mumbled, "Arigato," a slip of the tongue that earned him a curious but not unkind glance. "Time for your education," she announced, her voice devoid of pleasantries but full of purpose. She manipulated her console, and the main view screen, a colossal monitor that took up half the wall, flickered to life. Welcome to Gotham Rogues Gallery 101. Pay attention. There will be a test, and the penalty for failure is usually a pine box. Deku, perched on his metal chair with a datapad and stylus he'd been given, instinctively straightened his back. This was his element. Analysis. Information. He could work with this. The first image that appeared was a mugshot of a man with chalk-white skin, green hair, and a rictus grin carved into his face. The eyes were pits of pure, nihilistic madness. Even in a still photograph, they were terrifying. Subject's name is unknown, Oracle began, her voice a clinical monotone. He calls himself the Joker. No known powers. No consistent ideology. His sole motivation appears to be the proliferation of chaos for his own amusement. He considers his ongoing war with Batman to be a grand cosmic joke. A new window opened, displaying a rapid-fire montage of crime scene photos. Swirls of chemical green gas, bodies contorted into gruesome smiles, playing cards left as a signature. It was a highlight reel of pure, unadulterated horror. Deku's stomach churned. He had faced Shigaraki, had seen the decay, had fought against All for One, a being of pure evil. But this was different. This wasn't a quest for power or a twisted desire to remake the world. This was cruelty as performance art. His methodology is unpredictable, Oracle continued. Chemical weapons, explosives, psychological torture, hand-to-hand combat. He's a master of them all. He's the single greatest domestic threat this city has ever known. It was in his final battle with Batman that they both disappeared. Deku diligently scribbled notes, his pen scratching furiously against the datapad's screen. Joker. Quirkless? Psychological chemical warfare. High intelligence, extreme unpredictability. Motivation, anarchic nihilism. The ultimate chaotic variable. The thought that this level of destruction could be wrought by a man without a single superhuman ability was a deeply unsettling paradigm shift. One by one, the faces changed, each one a new chapter in Gotham's textbook of horrors. Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. A short, corpulent man who hid his ruthless ambition as a mob boss behind the semi-legitimate facade of his Iceberg Lounge nightclub. His weapon was influence, information, and a network of thugs that ran the city's gun-running trade. Edward Nygma, the Riddler. A narcissist with a genius-level intellect and a pathological compulsion to prove it, leaving elaborate, often deadly, riddles for Batman to solve. He wasn't motivated by greed, but by an obsessive need for validation. Harvey Dent, Two-Face. A tragic figure, once the city's crusading district attorney, now a man whose every decision was dictated by the flip of a scarred coin, leaving life and death to pure, brutal chance. The list went on and on. Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, Killer Croc, Black Mask. Some had powers, or abilities, as Oracle called them, born of chemical spills and freak accidents. But many, like Riddler and Penguin, were just men. Broken, twisted, brilliant men who had turned their obsessions into weapons. Deku's notes became a complex web of connections, psychological profiles, and tactical weaknesses. He absorbed the information with a terrifying focus, his mind, honed by years of analyzing heroes, now pointed at a new, darker pantheon. He felt a growing sense of dread, but also a flicker of understanding. He saw the patterns. Batman hadn't just been fighting criminals, he'd been fighting a city-wide mental illness. He was part warden, part psychiatrist, part detective, and part warrior. How did he do it? Deku asked, his voice barely a whisper, looking up from his notes. How did one man fight all of this? Before Oracle could answer, a new voice, calm and laced with a distinguished British accent, spoke from the entrance to the bunker. He did it by understanding one fundamental truth, young man. Deku and Oracle turned. An elderly man stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a black suit. He was tall and slender, with thinning white hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. His posture was perfect, but his eyes held a profound and ancient sadness, the look of a man who had buried too many people he loved. In his hands he carried a silver tray with a teapot, cups, and a plate of what looked like freshly baked scones. Master Richard, I trust your guest is being made comfortable? The man said, his gaze falling on Deku. It was a look that carried no judgment, only a deep, weary assessment. Alfred, Oracle said, her tone softening with genuine affection. This is Izuku Midoriya. Izuku, this is Alfred Pennyworth. It is an honor to meet you, sir, Deku said, scrambling to his feet and bowing deeply. Alfred offered a small, sad smile. Charmed, I'm sure, Master Midoriya. Please sit. Sustenance is required for such grim lessons. He set the tray down on a small table. The simple, domestic act felt profoundly out of place, a fragile piece of civilization in this military-grade command center. He poured 3 cups of tea, his movements economical and graceful. You asked how he did it, Alfred continued, handing a cup to Deku. He did it by dedicating his entire being to a single, unwavering principle. It was the line he drew not for the benefit of his enemies, but for the preservation of his own soul. The no-kill rule, Deku breathed, remembering the detail from Nightwing's terse explanation. Precisely, Alfred affirmed. Master Bruce knew that the darkness in this city is a contagion. To take a life, even a life as depraved as the Joker's, would be to succumb to the disease. It would be to validate their chaos, to become the very monster he was trying to defeat. His strength was not in his fists, but in his restraint. Deku looked at Alfred, and for the first time since arriving in this terrifying dimension, he felt a flicker of genuine connection. I understand. A hero must never take a life. It's the most important rule. Alfred's gaze sharpened, a glimmer of something, surprise? Interest, in his tired eyes. He studied Deku's face, the earnest sincerity in his expression. You believe that, don't you? With your whole heart. Of course, Deku said, confused. Isn't that obvious? In this city, Master Midoriya, Alfred said softly, nothing good is ever obvious. He glanced at Deku's datapad, at the furious scrawling of notes and diagrams. You have an analytical mind. You deconstruct your opponents, just as he did. But Master Bruce was driven to this life by a great emptiness, a void carved into him as a child in an alleyway. You, Alfred paused, his gaze seeming to pierce right through Deku's skin. You seem to be driven by an overwhelming fullness. A light that you are desperate to share. Deku was speechless. No one had ever articulated the core of his being so perfectly. All Might had given him the power, but his drive, his need to save everyone, came from a place of profound admiration and empathy. It was a fullness, as Alfred put it. That light is a precious commodity here, Alfred finished, his voice heavy with warning. And this city has a voracious appetite for extinguishing such things. He turned his attention to Oracle. Master Richard is awake. He believes it is time. Oracle nodded. He's right. Your current attire is loud. She gestured to Deku's green hero costume, which he had cleaned as best he could but still looked ridiculously out of place. It's a target. In Gotham, you don't wear a target. You become a shadow. Indeed, Alfred said, a new sense of purpose in his demeanor. If you would be so kind as to accompany me, Master Midoriya. We have something for you. Alfred led Deku to another elevator, one that descended even deeper into the earth. The doors opened into a small, immaculately clean armory. Weapons, things that looked like a cross between a bat and a shuriken, grappling guns, smoke pellets, lined one wall. On another were spare parts for armor and tech. But in the center of the room, standing on a featureless black mannequin, was a suit. It was nothing like his gamma costume. The vibrant, hopeful green was gone, replaced by a body of matte, charcoal gray fabric that looked like it would drink the light rather than reflect it. Segmented, overlapping plates of a dark, non-reflective ceramic material covered the chest, shoulders, forearms, and shins. The boots were heavy, reinforced, their soles thick but designed for silence. There were still flashes of his identity, but they were muted, tactical. The gauntlets and greaves were a dark, forest green, the color of pine trees at midnight. A subtle, stylized emblem was embossed on the chest, not a cheerful smile, but an angular design that hinted at his cowl's ears, shaped almost like a jagged, abstract E. The most striking feature was the headpiece. The familiar, rabbit ear-like appendages were still there, but they were shorter, more swept back, looking less like a friendly animal and more like sharpened horns. The mask itself was more severe, covering the lower half of his face with a filtered rebreather, and the attached hood was deep and heavy, designed to cast his entire face into shadow. A prototype Wayne Enterprises urban stealth suit, Alfred explained, running a gloved hand over the material on the chest plate. Designed for high-risk corporate espionage and retrieval operations before the project was repurposed. Ballistic weave fabric, resistant to blades and small arms fire. The plating is a Kevlar ceramic composite, capable of deflecting a high-caliber round at medium range, though I would strongly advise against testing that theory. Deku stepped forward, his eyes wide. He reached out and touched the fabric of the arm. It was tough, slightly abrasive, but surprisingly flexible. He could feel the technology humming within it. The gauntlets contain miniaturized EMP emitters and a line launcher, Alfred continued, pointing. The boots are magnetized for adhesion to metallic surfaces. The cowl's lenses have multiple vision modes, thermal, night vision, and the entire suit is shielded against electrical discharge. He paused. A lesson Master Richard learned the hard way last night, I believe. It was a suit built for a war zone. It was a suit built for Gotham. It's... Deku started, unsure of what to say. It's incredible. It is a tool, Alfred corrected gently. And a shield. Nothing more. The man defines the suit, not the other way around. Try it on. We must ensure a perfect fit. The process of changing was a ritual. As he stripped off his bright, familiar costume, it felt like he was shedding his very identity. He folded the green fabric carefully, a wave of homesickness washing over him. That suit was his promise to All Might, his symbol. Donning the new suit was a different experience entirely. It was heavier, more constricting. When he pulled the caul over his head and the rebreather clicked into place, the world became filtered, muted. He looked at his reflection in a polished steel panel on the wall. He didn't see Deku. The figure staring back at him was a creature of the night. Tall and posing, his features obscured by shadow. The dark green accents only served to make the gray and black seem deeper. He was a specter, a ghost. He was what Nightwing had told him he needed to become. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine that was part fear, part grim resolve. It suits you, Alfred said from behind him, his voice laced with a sadness Deku was beginning to recognize as his default state. More than I would like. Meanwhile, miles away, in the forgotten chemical wing of Gotham University, rain lashed against the grimy, wire-meshed windows of the laboratory. Inside, the only light came from a single, buzzing fluorescent bulb that cast long, dancing shadows across the chemical-stained countertops and dusty beakers. The air was thick with the smell of ammonia and something else, something cloyingly sweet and deeply unsettling, like night-blooming flowers rotting on the vine. Dr. Eris Thorne whimpered, his back pressed against the cold, tiled wall. He was a man of science, of logic. He believed in quantifiable data, in cause and effect. But the thing standing before him defied all reason. It called itself the Scarecrow. The figure was tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered burlap and worn leather straps that looked like they'd been scavenged from an asylum. Its head was a horrifying burlap sack, stitched together with crude, thick twine. Two mismatched button eyes stared out, devoid of life or emotion, and a jagged, stitched grin was frozen on its face. In one spindly, gloved hand, it held a wicked-looking syringe filled with a swirling, amber liquid. Fear, Doctor, the Scarecrow said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that sounded like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was a lecturer's voice, calm and academic, which only made the words more terrifying. It is the most primal, most powerful of human emotions. The engine of all evolution. It keeps us from touching the fire, from stepping off the cliff. But in its purest form, it is a key. A key that can unlock the deepest, darkest chambers of the human psyche. Thorne, a brilliant biochemist whose career had been ruined by accusations of unethical experimentation with hallucinogens, could only shake his head, tears streaming down his face. Please, I don't know anything. Oh, but you do, Scarecrow countered, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The single light bulb above them flickered, making his shadow writhe like a living thing. Your research into psychoactive neurotoxins, specifically, your work on an aerosolized agent that could bypass the blood-brain barrier and directly stimulate the amygdala. It was brilliant, cast aside by lesser minds, but I appreciated it. He had been ambushed an hour ago. One moment, he was locking up his private, off-campus lab. The next, the air had filled with a sweet, sickly mist. His heart had seized in his chest. The shadows in the alley had coalesced into spiders, hundreds of them, with his late mother's disappointed face on their backs, skittering toward him. He had screamed and collapsed, paralyzed by a vision tailored to his most secret, most pathetic phobias. When he awoke, he was here. Batman is gone, Doctor, Scarecrow explained, his tone conversational. He used fear as a blunt instrument. A crude tool for a crude man. He made criminals afraid of the dark. I will make the entire city afraid to think. Afraid to breathe. I will compose a symphony of terror, and your unpublished work will provide the final, exquisite crescendo. He raised the syringe. My current formula is effective, but it has limitations. It preys on existing phobias. I want to create something more profound. A toxin that doesn't just show you what you're afraid of, but makes you afraid of your own potential. Afraid of hope. Afraid of the very concept of a future. Thorne tried to scramble away, but two large, silent men in orderly uniforms blocked his path. They were Scarecrow's muscle, hired goons who moved with a mindless obedience. You will help me perfect it, Scarecrow stated, his voice losing its academic tone and taking on a cold, hard edge of command. Or I will give you a practical demonstration. I will lock you in a room and expose you to every failed permutation of the formula until your mind is nothing but a shattered mirror of screaming terrors. Do you understand? He brought the syringe close to Thorne's face. The doctor could see the oily liquid inside, could almost feel its phantom presence in his veins. He saw the spiders again, crawling at the edge of his vision. He saw his father's belt, raised to strike. He saw every failure, every humiliation, every dark corner of his past. Yes, Thorne sobbed, his body shaking uncontrollably. I understand. I'll help you. The Scarecrow's stitched mouth didn't move, but Thorne could feel the smile behind it. Excellent, the creature rasped. Let the lesson begin. The night was cold and sharp. Deku stood on a rooftop next to Nightwing, the wind whipping the edges of his new hood around his face. He felt clumsy, burdened by the suit's weight. Every movement seemed to make a sound, the scuff of a boot, the rustle of fabric. Back home, in his own costume, he moved with a fluid, explosive grace. Here, he felt like an elephant trying to learn ballet. You're breathing too loud, Nightwing said without looking at him. His voice, filtered through the calms and Deku's cowl, was a sharp, clear presence in his ear. And you're scanning with your head, not your eyes. Too much movement. You're a beacon. Deku forced himself to be still, to slow his breathing. This was their first patrol. Oracle had given him a new designation for the comms, something to differentiate him from his Japanese name, Emerald. It felt odd. We're not here to fight, Emerald, Nightwing instructed, his voice low and patient, the tone of a weary teacher. Not yet. We're here to listen. Watch. He pointed toward a street corner 3 stories below. A group of men were gathered under a sputtering street lamp, exchanging a briefcase for a small, heavy-looking bag. A drug deal. Or an arms deal. In Gotham, they were often one and the same. Deku's muscles tensed. His instinct, honed by 100 battles, screamed at him to intervene. Leap down. Full cowl, 5%. Disarm, incapacitate, secure. The entire engagement would take 4 seconds. Stay put, Nightwing commanded, as if reading his mind. Watch. Nightwing moved to the edge of the roof, his movements utterly silent. He unclipped a small, metallic disc from his belt. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it. The disc sailed through the air and landed without a sound in a pile of trash cans in the alley behind the criminals. A moment later, a high-pitched sonic frequency emanated from the device. It was just at the edge of human hearing, a deeply unsettling, nerve-grating sound. The men below flinched, looking around nervously. What was that? One of them hissed. Probably just rats, another replied, but his hand went to the gun tucked in his waistband. Next, Nightwing pulled a small, bird-shaped shuriken from his gauntlet. He didn't throw it at the men. He aimed at a frayed rope holding a large, canvas tarp over a stack of crates on a nearby fire escape. The wingdings sliced through the rope with a faint snick. The heavy tarp fell with a loud whump, startling the men, who jumped and spun around, guns now drawn. Who's there? Their leader shouted into the darkness, his voice tight with panic. Now the paranoia was setting in. They were staring into the shadows, their eyes wide, seeing enemies where there were none. They started arguing, accusing each other of setting up a double-cross. The final piece was the most chilling. Nightwing spoke into his wrist communicator, his voice filtered through a distorter that made it a low, demonic growl, a sound that seemed to come from the alley itself. I see you. That was all it took. Absolute chaos erupted. The men screamed, firing their guns blindly into the shadows. The man with the briefcase dropped it and ran. Another shoved his companion to the ground to use him as a shield. Within 10 seconds they had scattered like cockroaches, leaving their merchandise behind, their deals shattered not by a punch, but by a whisper. Nightwing stood up, a silent specter against the skyline. He had neutralized the threat, stopped the deal, and would now alert the GCPD to the location of the abandoned contraband, all without ever being seen. Deku was stunned into silence. It was brutally efficient, intellectually superior, and psychologically terrifying. It was also the complete antithesis of everything he had ever been taught. All might save people with a smile, a booming laugh that chased away the fear. He was a pillar of light, a symbol of hope that you could see and believe in. This was the opposite. This was using fear itself as a weapon. It was becoming a ghost story whispered by criminals, a monster in the dark that they created in their own minds. It didn't inspire hope in the citizens, it instilled terror in the wicked. That's the Gotham way, Nightwing said, turning to him. You don't have to be stronger than them. You just have to be smarter, and you have to make them believe you are in every shadow, that you hear every word. You don't fight the crime. You become the fear that prevents it. Deku looked down at his gloved hands, at the dark green accents on the gray armor. He had the power to end every single one of those deals in this city with overwhelming force. He could be a one-man army, but he was beginning to understand that it wouldn't work. It would cause property damage, draw attention, and make him a target. He would be a force of nature, but not a solution. To save Gotham, he couldn't be a tidal wave. He had to be the creeping tide, silent and inexorable. He had to learn to be a ghost. As he stood there, a silent, hooded figure on a Gotham rooftop, a chilling thought entered his mind. He was willing to learn. He was willing to adapt. But as he learned to master the darkness of this city, he had to wonder, how much of his own light would he have to leave behind? The nights bled into one another, a relentless cycle of damp chill and shadowed rooftops. Under Nightwing's demanding tutelage, Izuku Midoriya was being remade. The boisterous, open-hearted hero Deku was being systematically dismantled, and in his place, the silent, watchful vigilante Emerald was being forged. He learned the rhythm of the city, the ebb and flow of its depravity. He learned to distinguish the sound of a backfiring truck from a gunshot, to read the language of graffiti for gang territory warnings, to trace the flow of illicit goods through the whispers of informants Nightwing met in shadowy alcoves. He learned to move with a silence that felt unnatural, every footstep a betrayal of his explosive power. He was a living nuclear reactor being taught to operate like a pocket watch. The new suit began to feel less like a costume and more like a second skin. He mastered the use of the grappling line launcher in his gauntlets, swinging through the concrete canyons with a growing, albeit clumsy, grace that was a pale imitation of Nightwing's acrobatic artistry. He learned to use the cowl's enhanced vision modes to track heat signatures through walls and to see in the pitch-black bellies of abandoned warehouses. He was a quick study. His analytical mind, which had once deconstructed the quirks of his classmates, was now a sponge for tactical information. Oracle would feed him architectural blueprints of target locations, and he would memorize every vent, every structural weakness, every possible entry and exit point. He could predict patrol patterns and identify blind spots with an unnerving accuracy that even Nightwing had to grudgingly respect. But beneath the surface of this rapid adaptation, a deep and troubling conflict brewed within him. Every instinct screamed in protest. Every fiber of his being, supercharged with the legacy of One for All, yearned to be unleashed. It was a physical ache, a constant pressure behind his ribs. He was a savior who was being taught to be a spy. He was a symbol of hope learning the art of terror. You're hesitating, Nightwing's voice crackled in his calm one night. They were perched on a water tower, observing a shakedown in the alley below. Members of the Falcone crime family were roughing up a shop owner who was late on his protection payment. You had a window to deploy a smoke pellet and disorient them 3 seconds ago. You missed it. There's a child's bedroom window directly above them, Deku whispered back, his eyes fixed on the silhouette of a teddy bear visible through the grimy glass. The blowback from the pellet could have entered the room. It's a mild irritant, but for a small child, it could cause respiratory distress. There was a pause on the other end of the comm. That's a 0.05% probability, Emerald. A calculated risk. It's not 0%, Deku countered, his voice tight. A hero's first priority is to prevent all harm to civilians. Even potential harm. Our first priority, Nightwing's voice came back, laced with a familiar, weary frustration, is to get the job done and survive the night. Sometimes that means choosing the least terrible option. Welcome to Gotham. This was the core of their ideological schism. Nightwing operated in a world of acceptable losses and calculated risks. Deku came from a world where the goal, however impossible, was to save everyone. He couldn't reconcile the two. He couldn't bring himself to see a civilian as a percentage point in a risk assessment. The tension between them was a constant, unspoken third member of their team. Nightwing saw Deku's immense power and his frustrating, naive idealism as a dangerous cocktail. He was a scalpel with the mindset of a sledgehammer. Deku, in turn, saw Nightwing's methods as cold and cynical, a necessary evil that seemed to lean too heavily on the evil and not enough on the necessary. Oracle, the pragmatic bridge between their two worlds, did her best to mediate. "He's learning, Dick," she would say after a particularly tense patrol. "You're trying to teach a foreign language by shouting it. Give him time." But Gotham was running out of time. The power vacuum left by Batman's absence was becoming a gaping wound. The Penguin was growing bolder, moving from simple gun-running to trafficking in high-grade military hardware. Intelligence gathered by Oracle pointed to a massive arms deal going down in 2 days. Cobblepot's men were set to acquire a shipment of experimental sonic cannons, weapons capable of leveling a city block. It was a threat that couldn't be ignored or subtly disrupted. It had to be stopped, hard and fast. "This is it," Nightwing said, his holographic image projected into the center of the safe house's main room. He was out in the field, gathering last-minute intel. Deku and Oracle were at the command center. "The deal is happening at the old Gotham shipyard, Pier 12. My sources say the exchange is at midnight. Penguin's top lieutenant, a brute named Ignatius Ogilvy, is overseeing it personally." On the main screen, Oracle pulled up a satellite image of the shipyard, highlighting Pier 12. It was a sprawling, rusted maze of shipping containers, cranes, and derelict warehouses, a tactical nightmare. "Dozens of armed hostiles," Oracle reported, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "They have the high ground on the cranes and catwalks. A direct assault is suicide." "We won't be making a direct assault," Nightwing said. His plan was elegant, precise, and relied heavily on stealth. He would infiltrate from the water, disabling their communications and planting trackers on the weapons crates. Deku, the Emerald Ghost, would create a series of diversions on the opposite side of the pier, drawing the guards' attention, splitting their forces. Once the trackers were active, they would pull back and let the GCPD, guided by Oracle, move in for the arrest. The goal was to secure the weapons and capture the key players with minimal engagement. "No smashing," Nightwing added, his holographic eyes seeming to stare directly at Deku. "No shows of force. You are a whisper. A shadow. You draw their attention, you don't engage. Is that clear, Emerald?" Deku looked at the schematics, at the dozens of red dots indicating armed hostiles. He saw the crate icons representing the sonic cannons. He felt the familiar thrum of one for all under his skin, a caged beast rattling its bars. "It's clear," he said, his voice betraying none of his internal conflict. But it wasn't clear at all. The plan felt passive. It was a plan to mitigate, not to win. It was a plan that left too much to chance, too much in the hands of a police force that was already stretched thin and outgunned. It was the Gotham way, and it felt fundamentally wrong. Midnight at the Gotham shipyard was a symphony of decay. The air was thick with the brine of the sea and the rust of dying industry. A cold, damp wind whistled through the canyons of stacked shipping containers, carrying with it the mournful groan of stressed metal. The only light came from a few portable floodlights that cast long, distorted shadows, making the familiar shapes of cranes and gantries look like skeletal monsters. Deku moved through the darkness, a gray and green phantom. He kept to the shadows, his magnetized boots allowing him to cling to the sides of metal containers, moving with a silence that would have made Alfred proud. Through the calm in his cowl, he could hear the faint splash of water. Nightwing, beginning his infiltration. "Phase 1 is a go," Nightwing's voice whispered in his ear. I'm in position. Create your first diversion in 60 seconds. Copy, Deku whispered back. He peered around the edge of a container. He saw them. A dozen of Penguin's men, armed with automatic rifles, patrolled the pier. They were jumpy, their eyes scanning the darkness, their breath pluming in the cold air. Near the center of the pier, a large truck was backing up to a shipping container that had been opened, revealing crates stenciled with military warnings. A large, powerfully built man with a sneer on his face, Ogilvy, was directing the operation. Deku's target for the first diversion was a generator powering one of the floodlights. According to the plan, he was to use a calibrated EMP device to short it out, plunging half the pier into darkness and drawing a team of guards to investigate. He crept closer, his heart pounding a steady, controlled rhythm. 60 seconds. Everything was going according to plan, and then, everything changed. A new group of men emerged from behind a stack of crates. They weren't Penguin's crew. They were dressed in worn leather and denim, their faces hardened and desperate. They were scavengers, a small-time crew who had likely stumbled upon the deal and decided they were brave, or stupid, enough to crash it. There were only 5 of them, armed with handguns and knives. It was a suicide mission. One of Penguin's lookouts spotted them. Hey! Who the hell are you? The scavengers opened fire. The sudden eruption of gunfire shattered the night's quiet. Penguin's men, better trained and better armed, returned fire with brutal efficiency. Emerald, what's happening? Nightwing's voice demanded in his ear. That's not your diversion, third party. Deku hissed back. A small crew, they've engaged Ogilvy's men. The firefight was short, and tragically one-sided. 4 of the scavengers went down in a hail of bullets. The 5th, a young man who couldn't have been much older than Deku himself, dropped his empty pistol and tried to flee. He was cornered against a container, his hands raised in surrender. Ogilvy strode toward him, his face a mask of cold fury. He pulled a large-caliber revolver from his coat. You morons, Ogilvy snarled, his voice carrying across the pier. You thought you could crash our party? You just bought yourself a permanent lesson in minding your own business. He cocked the hammer of the revolver, the sound echoing with chilling finality, and aimed it at the young man's head. The world slowed down for Izuku Midoriya. He saw the scene with a horrifying clarity. The terrified eyes of the young man, wide with the certainty of his own death. The cruel, indifferent sneer on Ogilvy's face. The barrel of the gun, a dark, perfect circle of impending doom. No, a voice screamed inside his head. It was All Might's voice. It was his own. A hero saves people. Nightwing's plan, the careful stealth, the trackers, the GCPD, all of it dissolved in the face of this one, absolute moment. The plan would not save this man. The police would arrive too late to do anything but draw a chalk outline. All the clever tactics and strategic whispers were meaningless if they allowed this one person to die. Emerald, do not engage. Nightwing's order was sharp, desperate. Stick to the plan. We can't jeopardize the mission for one street punk. But Izuku wasn't listening. He wasn't Emerald anymore. He was Deku. One for all, full call 20%. Green lightning erupted around him, tearing through the darkness. The suit, designed for stealth, whined under the sudden, massive energy surge. He didn't use the grappling line. He didn't creep through the shadows. He exploded. He launched himself from his hiding spot, a gray and green missile of righteous fury. He crossed the 50 yards to the center of the pier in less than a second, a blur of motion that was over before most of Penguin's men could even register it. The sound of his arrival was a concussive boom, a miniature sonic shockwave that cracked the concrete beneath his feet as he landed. He landed directly between Ogilvy and his intended victim. The shockwave alone sent the young scavenger tumbling backward, out of harm's way. Ogilvy, caught completely by surprise, was blasted off his feet, his revolver flying from his hand. For a heartbeat, there was a stunned, absolute silence. The remaining thugs stared, their mouths agape, at the figure that had appeared from nowhere. The hooded specter, crackling with an impossible green energy, his lenses glowing with a fierce, internal light. Then Ogilvy roared, "What the hell is that thing? Kill it!" The silence was replaced by the deafening roar of automatic weapons. A dozen rifles opened fire at once. Deku didn't even flinch. He simply raised his arms as bullets sparked and ricocheted off his armored gauntlets and chest plate. The suit was holding, but the impacts felt like a hailstorm of sledgehammers. He wouldn't just stand there and be a target. Black whip, tendrils of black energy, far thicker and more powerful than the ones he'd used in the alley, erupted from his back. They were living, angry things, lashing out with incredible speed. They snatched rifles from the thugs' hands, crushing the metal frames. They wrapped around ankles, yanking men off their feet. They coiled around a nearby floodlight and tore it from its stand, plunging the area into a chaotic dance of light and shadow. "Emerald, what are you doing?" Nightwing's voice was a furious roar in his ear, but it was distant, muffled by the thunder of combat in Deku's own head. "You're compromising everything. Fall back. That's an order." Deku ignored him. This was what he was born to do. This was saving people. He saw a group of thugs trying to get to the truck with the sonic cannons. He couldn't let them get their hands on those weapons. Delaware smash! He flicked his fingers, channeling 20% of his power into a focused blast of air. It wasn't the city-leveling force of a 100% smash, but it was more than enough. The air cannon, a surgical strike of immense power, slammed into the side of the truck. The effect was catastrophic. The truck, a multi-ton vehicle, was lifted off its wheels and thrown sideways, slamming into a stack of shipping containers with a deafening shriek of tortured metal. The containers buckled under the impact, toppling over like dominoes in a cacophonous, ground-shaking chain reaction. One of the massive steel boxes crashed down onto the pier, its corner smashing through the thick wooden planks and concrete supports. The pier groaned, sagged, and a huge section of it collapsed into the dark, churning water below, taking crates, equipment, and a few screaming thugs with it. The sonic cannons were secured. They were at the bottom of Gotham Harbor, but the cost was immense. The carefully planned operation was not just compromised, it was annihilated. The pier was a disaster zone of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The element of surprise was gone. Every criminal in a 5-mile radius knew something had gone down. In the ensuing chaos, Ogilvy and the few men still standing scrambled away into the darkness, escaping into the shipyard's maze. Key players that were supposed to be captured were now scattered to the winds. The roar of combat was replaced by the groan of collapsing metal and the hiss of steam from a ruptured pipe. Deku stood in the center of the wreckage he had created, the green lightning slowly fading around him. The young man he had saved was gone, having fled during the fight. He had saved the life, but he had lost the mission. He could hear sirens now, approaching fast. Not the controlled arrival of the GCPD as part of their plan, but a panicked, city-wide response to a major incident. "Get out of there." Now Nightwing's voice ordered. It was no longer angry. It was flat, cold, and heavy with a terrifying disappointment. "Rendezvous at the secondary site. We're done here." Deku looked at the devastation. He had stopped the deal. He had saved a life. By the standards of his world, it was a victory, albeit a messy one. But as he looked at the millions of dollars in property damage, at the escaped criminals, at the compromised integrity of the entire pier, a cold, sickening feeling washed over him. He felt the weight of Nightwing's silent condemnation through the comlink. This wasn't a victory. This was a catastrophe. He fired his grappling line and swung away into the darkness, the sounds of the approaching sirens chasing after him, an accusatory chorus for his failure. High on a crane on the opposite side of the shipyard, a figure watched the entire spectacle through the scope of a high-powered rifle. He hadn't fired a shot. He had just observed. He was a big man, built like a brick wall, clad in a brown leather jacket over tactical body armor. A striking red helmet, smooth and featureless save for 2 white, expressive eye slits, covered his entire head. The Red Hood. Jason Todd had been tracking this arms deal for a week, preparing to move in and handle it his own way. His way involved less capturing and more body bags. He had been about to start his assault when the green and gray newcomer had appeared. He had watched the display of power with a cynical, detached interest. The speed, the strength, the weird black tentacles. It was impressive, he'd give the kid that. But it was also sloppy. Reckless, sentimental. He saw the kid hesitate when the firefight started. He saw the moment of decision, the idiotic, self-sacrificing charge to save one worthless street rat at the cost of the entire operation. It was the kind of move Batman would have made, but without any of Batman's grace or control. It was all sound and fury, signifying nothing. A naive replacement, he muttered to himself, his voice a distorted, electronic growl from his helmet's modulator. He lowered his rifle. There was nothing left for him here. The contraband was gone, the big fish had fled. The new guy had royally screwed the pooch. He'd heard the whispers on the street about a new vigilante, a Green Knight working with Nightwing. He had assumed it was some new recruit, another one of Dick's pet projects. He hadn't expected this. A metahuman powerhouse with the tactical sense of a rampaging bull. "You won't last a month, kid," Red Hood said to the empty air, watching the green-clad figure swing away into the night. He had seen Gotham chew up and spit out idealists before. He had been one of them, once. Now he knew the truth. The city didn't need a savior. It needed an executioner. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and melted back into the shadows. This new player was a problem. A loud, destructive problem. And if Nightwing couldn't get his new pet under control, then Red Hood would have to handle it himself. Permanently. The city had enough chaos. It didn't need a well-intentioned wrecking ball making things worse. The silence in the safe house was a weapon. It was a cold, heavy blanket of disapproval that suffocated Izuku Midoriya, pressing down on him with more force than any physical blow. He had removed the collar of his new suit, and his face, smudged with grime and beaded with sweat, was a mask of shame. He sat on the metal chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white, staring at the polished concrete floor as if it held the answers to his failure. Nightwing stood across the room, his back to Deku, methodically stripping off his own armor plating. Each click of a buckle, each rasp of a Velcro strap, sounded like a gunshot in the tomb-like quiet. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't screamed. The cold, controlled fury radiating from him was far, far worse. "Report," Nightwing said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He placed the gauntlet on a workbench with a sharp, deliberate clang. The primary objective was a failure, Deku stammered, forcing himself to meet the vigilante's back. Ignatius Ogilvy and at least 6 other high-value targets escaped in the chaos. The sonic cannons were lost, presumably destroyed when the pier collapsed. Presumably, Nightwing repeated, the single word dripping with ice. "You mean the pier you collapsed?" Yes. Oracle estimates the property damage to be in the tens of millions. The GCPD are now treating this as a metahuman gang war. Commissioner Gordon is furious. "We've lost any tactical advantage we had, and Cobblepot's operation, while inconvenienced, is now on high alert. They will be impossible to track for weeks." He finally turned, his domino mask doing nothing to hide the blazing anger in his eyes. "All of this, because you couldn't follow one simple order. All of this, to save a 2-bit hoodlum who was probably back on the street robbing someone else before the sirens even faded. His life was in danger." Deku shot back, his own frustration and guilt finally boiling over. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Ogilvy was going to execute him. What was I supposed to do? Let him die? Is that the Gotham way? To stand by and watch people get murdered so a mission can succeed? Yes. If it means saving 100 more lives tomorrow, yes. Nightwing exploded, taking a step forward, his voice finally breaking its icy dam and becoming a raw, powerful roar. "That's the choice we make. The choice you don't seem to understand. This isn't a game, kid. This isn't a comic book where you punch the bad guy and everyone cheers. This is a war. And in a war, you make sacrifices. You don't blow up the entire battlefield to save one soldier. He's not a soldier, he's a human being. And what about the people who will die when Penguin gets his hands on the next shipment of weapons because we lost our only lead?" Nightwing countered, jabbing a finger in Deku's direction. "What about the families that will be torn apart by the gang war you just escalated? Their lives matter too. Or do they only count if they're right in front of your face?" Deku had no answer. The terrible, crushing logic of Nightwing's words slammed into him. He had acted on instinct, on the core tenet of his heroic code. He had saved the person in front of him, But he had never been forced to confront the potential consequences of that choice, the unseen victims of his heroic impulse. "You have too much power," Nightwing said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You're a nuke who thinks he's a firecracker. You're a liability. Until I can trust you not to bring this entire city down around our ears, you're benched. Confined to this safe house. Don't even think about putting on that suit." He turned his back again, a clear dismissal. The argument was over. The verdict had been delivered. Deku sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. He was a hero in a cage. A savior forbidden from saving. He stared at his hands, the hands that held the power of 8 generations of heroes, and for the first time in his life, he felt like they were a curse. The silence returned, heavier and more damning than before. In his own squalid, hidden laboratory, Dr. Jonathan Crane felt something akin to professional satisfaction. The news reports were a delightful cacophony of fear and confusion. A metahuman turf war, an emerald phantom of immense power. The city was on edge, a perfectly tuned instrument awaiting its conductor. "Chaos," he whispered to himself, adjusting the stitched grin on his burlap mask. A fertile ground for the seeds of terror. This new player, this Emerald Knight, was a fascinating variable. The descriptions were contradictory. Immense destructive power, yet eyewitnesses claimed he'd intervened to save a common criminal. A creature of brute force and sentimentality. A being of light trying to play in the dark. Crane found the dichotomy utterly delicious. A creature like that was defined by its ideals. By its hope. And for Scarecrow, hope was not an obstacle, it was a target. It was the most exquisite vulnerability of all. "He is a symbol," Crane mused, looking at the bubbling beakers and humming centrifuges that were refining his masterpiece. Dr. Thorne, pale and trembling, was working feverishly at a nearby station, his scientific brilliance now a tool for his captor. A new one. A flawed one. The people, the criminals, they don't know what to make of him. They don't know whether to fear him or laugh at him. I shall provide them with an answer. He would unmake this new hero. He wouldn't kill him. Death was a crude, unimaginative release. No, he would peel back the layers of the boy's psyche, find the load-bearing pillars of his courage, and dissolve them with his toxin. He would show Gotham that their new guardian was just a child, terrified of his own shadow. "The new formula is ready, Doctor?" Crane asked, his voice a dry rasp. Thorne nodded numbly, holding up a vial filled with a clear, almost invisible liquid. It's perfect. Theoretically. It no longer needs a direct aerosolized vector to trigger existing phobias. This is a psychoreactive mutagen. It will bond with the victim's neurotransmitters and construct a hallucinatory matrix based on their deepest, most foundational insecurities, their ambitions, their failures, their sense of self. It will turn it all into a weapon against them. Magnificent, Crane breathed. A toxin that tailors the terror. A bespoke nightmare. He had a plan. A trap. A stage for his symphony's debut performance. He had been studying the new hero's patrol patterns before the incident at the pier. The boy was drawn to the cries of the helpless, a moth to a flame. It was a disgustingly predictable weakness. Crane picked up a modified radio transmitter. The stage is set. Let the performance begin. 3 days passed. 3 days of an agonizing, self-imposed exile for Deku. He spent the time training his body to the point of exhaustion in the safe house's small gym, trying to outrun the shame that clung to him like a shroud. He pored over Oracle's files, memorizing every street, every name, every sordid detail of Gotham's history, hoping that knowledge could somehow atone for his reckless actions. He and Nightwing moved around each other like ghosts, their conversations limited to terse, one-word exchanges. The rift between them was a chasm of silence and disappointment. Deku knew Nightwing was out every night, working twice as hard, trying to clean up the mess he'd made, trying to be the protector the city needed, all on his own. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. On the 4th night, the alert came. "We have a situation," Oracle's voice announced, cutting through the tense quiet of the bunker. Multiple 911 calls from the old Gotham General Hospital in the Bowery. Reports of a man in a scarecrow mask releasing some kind of gas. People are screaming, panicking. Deku shot to his feet. Scarecrow. He recognized the name and MO instantly from the files. Dr. Jonathan Crane. Master of Fear. I'm on my way, Nightwing said, already shrugging on the final piece of his armor. Dick, wait, Oracle cautioned. The reports are strange. The victims aren't just scared, they're catatonic or attacking each other, screaming about things that aren't there. This sounds new. More potent. All the more reason to get there fast, Nightwing said, grabbing his eskrima sticks. Let me come with you, Deku pleaded, his voice raw with desperation. I'll follow your orders. Every single one. I swear. Just don't leave me here. Let me help. Nightwing paused, his hand on the door. He looked back at Deku, at the fire in his eyes, at the desperate need to atone. Maybe benching him wasn't the answer. Maybe the only way for the kid to learn was in the field. You are my shadow, Nightwing said, his voice cold and hard. You do nothing without my command. You breathe when I say breathe. One wrong move, one flicker of that green lightning without my express order, and you and I are done. Permanently. Understood? Understood, Deku replied without hesitation, a surge of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. He suited up in record time, the gray and green suit feeling less like a cage and more like a chance at redemption. The scene at the hospital was worse than they had imagined. It wasn't just panic. It was a full-blown psychological meltdown. People were clawing at their own faces, shrieking at unseen monsters. A woman was cowering from a potted plant, sobbing that its leaves were turning into grasping hands. A man was trying to fight his own reflection in a window, screaming that it was an imposter. A faint, sweet, cloying smell, like rotting flowers, hung in the air. This is bad, Nightwing muttered, observing from a nearby rooftop. He's using the hospital's ventilation system to spread the toxin. We need to get to the central control hub and shut it down. They entered through a skylight, moving through the halls like phantoms. The hospital was a madhouse. The air was thick with screams and the smell of fear. Oracle, can you guide us to the ventilation controls? Nightwing whispered into his comm. Third sublevel, maintenance wing, she replied. But be careful. The entire building is saturated. Your rebreathers should filter out the aerosolized particles, but direct exposure would be. Her voice was cut off by a sudden burst of static. Oracle? Nightwing said, tapping his ear. Babs? A new voice filled their comms, a dry, academic rasp that made the hair on Deku's arms stand on end. Good evening, gentlemen. I do hope you're enjoying the performance. It was Scarecrow. He had hijacked their frequency. The lights in the hallway flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. A second later, emergency shutters slammed down, sealing off the corridor in front of and behind them. A trap. A faint hissing sound started, and from vents in the ceiling, a clear, almost invisible vapor began to pour into the sealed hallway. Rebreathers on full. Nightwing ordered. Deku had already activated his. He could hear the hiss of the filtration system, a reassuring sound against the terror of the situation. But Scarecrow's voice continued to echo in their ears, calm and mocking. Oh, you think your little filters will save you? Adorable. I've evolved beyond such crude delivery systems. My new formula doesn't need to be inhaled. It's transdermal. It seeps through the pores, through the gaps in your armor. It's already in your blood. Deku's blood ran cold. He felt a sudden, strange tingling on the exposed skin of his neck. Let the lesson begin, Scarecrow whispered. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, Nightwing stumbled, letting out a sharp, guttural cry. He clutched his head, falling to one knee. Nightwing! Deku cried, rushing to his side. Dick, what is it? The bats. Nightwing gasped, his eyes wide with a terror Deku had never seen on him. He was staring at the ceiling, at the shadows. They're everywhere, crawling, with his smile. He was seeing something else. The toxin was working. Deku grabbed his arm, trying to pull him up. It's not real, Dick. It's the gas. Fight it. But Nightwing was lost, trapped in a nightmare forged from his own deepest trauma. His parents' fall, the Joker's cruelty, Batman's shadow. Deku had to get them out. He looked at the sealed metal shutter in front of them. He didn't need a smash. 10% of one for all, focused into a single punch, would be enough to tear it from its moorings. He braced himself, green energy beginning to flicker around his fist. He never threw the punch. The tingling on his skin intensified, and the world tilted on its axis. The hallway around him didn't change, but his perception of it warped. The floor seemed to drop away, and he was falling, not through a portal this time, but into a memory. He was standing in the rain, on a rooftop. A skinny, quirkless boy in a middle school uniform, his dreams shattered. And in front of him, skeletal and gaunt, was his idol, All Might. But not the All Might he knew. This version was emaciated, his eyes sunken and hollow. His signature smile was gone, replaced by a sneer of bitter disappointment. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, staining his white shirt. You! The specter of All Might rasped, his voice a hollow echo of its former glory. I chose you? A weak, crying, pathetic Deku? I should have let you jump off that roof. It would have been a kindness. No. Deku whispered, his heart seizing in his chest. That's not. You would never say that. I wasted my power on you, the Phantom continued, taking a shuffling step forward. My legacy. And what did you do with it? You ran away. You abandoned everyone who ever believed in you. You broke your promise. Look at me, boy. This is what you've made me. He gestured to his broken body, and the terrible wound on his side gaped open, a black, festering hole. The scene dissolved, replaced by another. He was in the ruins of the UE dorms. Everything was smashed, burning. And standing in the wreckage were his friends. Uraraka, her face streaked with soot and tears. Ida, his armor cracked, his glasses shattered. Todoroki, his face a mask of cold fury. You left us, Deku, Uraraka sobbed, her voice full of a pain that was sharper than any blade. The villains came. We needed you. Where were you? You were our friend, Midoriya, Ida said, his voice shaking with a righteous anger. Your duty was here. With us. You abandoned your post. You're not a hero, Todoroki stated, his voice flat and cold. You're a coward. No. No, please, it wasn't my choice. Deku cried, reaching out to them, but they dissolved into smoke at his touch. This was his greatest fear, not that he would fail, but that his very existence, his quest to save everyone, would somehow cause his loved ones to suffer. That by being here, he was failing them. The nightmare deepened. The world went black, and he felt the familiar, terrifying sensation of one for all surging within him, but it was wrong. It wasn't a warm, heroic power. It was a cold, ravenous fire, consuming him from the inside out. He looked down at his hands and saw them twist and contort, his skin cracking, dark red energy and black tendrils erupting from him like a disease. He felt a presence in his mind, ancient and evil, all for one. He was becoming a monster. The power he had been given to save people was turning him into the very thing he fought against. This was his deepest, most secret terror, that the immense power of One for All was too much for him, that one day he would lose control and become a force of pure destruction, a villain in a hero's skin. He screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure psychic agony, and collapsed, clutching his head, completely incapacitated. He was lost in a labyrinth of his own making, every insecurity, every doubt, every fear he had ever had now a living, breathing monster tearing him apart. Through the haze of his self-made hell, he was vaguely aware of sounds. A heavy boot kicking open a nearby door. Gunshots. Nightwing groaning. Then, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was distorted, electronic, and dripping with a cold, brutal pragmatism. Get up, you idiot. A heavy, armored boot kicked him hard in the ribs. The jolt of pain was a sharp, grounding anchor in the swirling sea of his nightmares. He looked up, his vision swimming. A figure loomed over him, silhouetted by the dim emergency lights. A man in a brown leather jacket and a smooth, featureless red helmet. The Red Hood. He was fighting off two of Scarecrow's goons, moving with a brutal efficiency that was terrifying to behold. He wasn't disabling them. He was destroying them. A pistol shot to the knee of one, a vicious elbow strike to the throat of the other. It was over in seconds. They lay groaning on the floor, crippled. Red Hood turned his attention back to Deku, who was still struggling to escape the phantom grip of his fears. Look at you. The big, tough replacement. Scared of a little gas? Pathetic. It's not real. Deku gasped, trying to force the words out. No kidding, Red Hood growled. He grabbed the front of Deku's suit and hauled him to his feet with surprising strength. But the bullets are. Now you gonna lie here and cry about your mommy issues, or are you gonna fight? He shoved Deku forward, forcing him to stumble. The raw, physical violence of it was a shock to his system. It was so different from Nightwing's controlled strikes. This was pure, street-level brutality, and it was working. The sharp, real pain was cutting through the phantom pains of the toxin. He looked over and saw Red Hood dragging a semi-conscious Nightwing toward the door he'd kicked open. Come on, Golden Boy, Red Hood grunted, slinging Nightwing's arm over his shoulder. Time to go, Scarecrow. Deku mumbled, his head still foggy. He's gone, Red Hood said, gesturing with his head down the hallway. Used you two as a distraction and slipped out the back. Classic Crane. He dragged both of them out of the main hallway and into a small maintenance stairwell, kicking the door shut behind them. The air here was clearer, the sweet smell of the toxin fainter. Red Hood dumped Nightwing unceremoniously on the landing. He turned his blank, red face to Deku. You got lucky. I was tracking Crane's movements and saw him set this little party up for you two. Another minute in there, and your brains would be scrambled eggs. Deku leaned against the wall, his whole body trembling as the last vestiges of the hallucinations faded, leaving behind the cold, clammy sweat of remembered terror. He had been completely and utterly defeated, not by a punch, not by a villain's masterstroke, but by his own mind. Why? Deku asked, his voice hoarse. Why did you help us? Red Hood let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded like grinding metal through his helmet's modulator. Don't get it twisted, kid. I didn't help him, he said, nudging Nightwing with his boot, and I sure as hell didn't help you. I came here to put a bullet in Crane's head. You just got in the way. But leaving two of Batman's strays to die in a chemical bath? It's bad for business. He looked Deku up and down, his helmet's white eye slits conveying a sense of utter contempt. You don't belong here. You're soft. You're a daylight hero trying to fight in a sewer. This city, it eats kids like you alive. He turned and started heading down the stairs. Get him back to your little clubhouse. And do us all a favor. Go home. Before Gotham makes you. With that cryptic warning, the Red Hood disappeared into the shadows of the stairwell, leaving Deku alone with a groaning Nightwing and the bitter, metallic taste of his own fear. He had been saved, but not by a hero. He had been rescued by a killer, a man who represented everything he stood against. It was the ultimate humiliation. He had faced his fears and been found wanting. As he knelt down to help his fallen comrade, a new, cold resolve began to form in the pit of his stomach. Scarecrow had shown him his weaknesses. He had turned his own heart into a weapon against him. Never again. He wouldn't run from his fear. He would turn it into a tool. He would analyze it, deconstruct it, and master it. He would learn from his enemy. He would learn the Gotham way, not just from Nightwing's lessons in stealth, but from Scarecrow's masterclass in terror. And he would use it to tear Jonathan Crane's symphony of fear apart, note by painful note.